We often feel like the center of the universe, a solid point around which the world revolves. We speak of my body, my thoughts, and my feelings, as if there is a permanent owner sitting behind the eyes. This sense of self is the most familiar thing we know, yet when we look closer, it begins to slip through our fingers like water. The Buddha invited us to investigate this mystery not as a religious dogma, but as a direct observation of reality. If we can understand the nature of who we are, or more importantly, who we are not, we can find a profound sense of peace that the world cannot disturb. This is the journey into the heart of Anatta, the teaching of non-self, a path toward true freedom. To understand why we feel so strongly that a self exists, we must look at the biological and psychological roots of our existence. Evolution has spent millions of years refining a survival machine that is hyper-focused on its own preservation and continuity. From an evolutionary perspective, the illusion of a central controller is incredibly useful for navigating a complex and dangerous world. It helps the organism navigate threats, seek resources, and maintain social status within a competitive tribe. We are wired to believe there is a CEO in the brain making decisions and steering the ship, because that belief keeps us alive and focused on individual success. However, this biological necessity creates a psychological prison that restricts our view of the world. We spend our entire lives defending a fortress that has no inhabitant and protecting a treasure that does not exist. Think about the last time you felt deeply insulted or hurt by someone else's words. Who was it that was wounded in that moment? We feel a sharp sting because we believe there is a solid and permanent entity called me that must be protected and validated at all costs. The Buddha observed that this clinging to a non-existent core is the primary source of all human suffering and anxiety. We are like actors who have forgotten we are playing a temporary role on a stage, becoming so lost in the character that we suffer when the script takes a dark or unexpected turn. The concept of anatta does not mean that you do not exist in a conventional sense or that you are a ghost, but rather that you are empty of a permanent, unchanging soul that remains the same throughout time. You are a process, a flow of events, a river that is never the same from one moment to the next despite its outward appearance. When we stop trying to find a solid ground in a world of constant change, we stop fighting against the nature of reality itself and find a new way of being. This recognition is not a loss of personality, but a liberation from the heavy burden of maintaining a false and rigid identity. We have been taught from childhood to build ourselves up, to become someone important, and to leave a lasting mark on the world. But the wisdom of the Buddha suggests that our greatest strength lies in letting go of the need to be a fixed point in space. By examining the root of our attachment to the self, we see that the ego is not a thing, but a repetitive habit of the mind. It is a pattern of grasping for what we like and pushing away what we fear. If we can observe this pattern without judgment or interference, we begin to see the gaps in the story of the self where silence resides. In those gaps, there is a quiet clarity that does not depend on our worldly achievements or our personal failures. This clarity is the beginning of insight, which allows us to move through the world with a light touch and a calm heart, unburdened by the constant need to prove our worth or defend our territory against others. We are not the stories we tell ourselves in the dark, and we are not the labels the world gives us to simplify our complexity. We are the vast and open space in which all these things arise and pass away like clouds in a summer sky. To live with the understanding of no self is to live with a heart that is wide open to every experience. because there is no longer a small, fragile ego that needs to be shielded from the truth of life or the pain of others. The Buddha provided a systematic way to deconstruct the illusion of self by looking at what he called the 5 aggregates of experience. These are the 5 components that make up our entire experience of being alive and perceiving the world around us. First, there is the physical form, the body made of bones, blood, and breath that we call our own. If you look closely at the body with a meditative mind, you see it is a collection of biological processes that are constantly changing and decaying. Is there a self in the hair, the skin, or the trillions of cells that die and are replaced every few years throughout your life? The body is a guest house for elements, not a permanent home for a soul. Second, there are feelings, the basic tones of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral that accompany every single moment of awareness. Feelings arise based on external conditions, and then they vanish just as quickly as they appeared. We do not choose our feelings through will. They simply happen to us as a response to the environment. Third, there is perception, the faculty that recognizes and labels things based on memory and language. It is the part of the mind that says, this is a tree, this is a car, or this is a friend whom I love. Perception is often skewed by our past experiences and hidden biases, making it an unreliable foundation for a solid and objective self. Fourth, there are mental formations, which include our thoughts, intentions, desires, and long-standing habits. These are the currents of the mind that drive our actions and shape our personality over time. If you sit quietly and watch your thoughts for just 10 minutes, you will see they appear out of nowhere and disappear back into the void without your permission. You are not the author of your thoughts in the way you think you are. You are the one who witnesses them as they pass through consciousness. Finally, there is consciousness itself, the basic awareness of being alive and experiencing the other 4 aggregates in real time. Many people mistake this consciousness for the eternal soul or the true self that remains unchanged. But even consciousness is dependent on specific conditions to exist. Eye consciousness only exists when there is a functioning eye and an object to see in the light. Ear consciousness only exists when there is a healthy ear and a sound to hear in the air. When we analyze these 5 parts with clarity, we find that none of them individually is the self. And even when they are all together, they do not create a permanent soul hidden inside. It is like the ancient metaphor of a chariot. If you take away the wooden wheels, the iron axle, the floorboards, and the leather reins, where is the chariot itself? The word chariot is just a label for a specific arrangement of parts working together for a time. In the same way, the word I is just a convenient label for a shifting collection of physical and mental events that arise and pass away. This realization is the key to unatachment. When we see that there is no solid person at the center of the storm of life, the storm loses its power to overwhelm us. We no longer take our shifting thoughts and volatile emotions so personally or seriously. We see them as natural phenomena, like the changing weather or the rising tides of the ocean. This does not lead to a state of cold indifference or nihilism, but to a profound sense of connection with all living things. Because the artificial barrier between self and other begins to dissolve into thin air. We are not separate islands in the ocean. We are the ocean itself, expressing itself in a billion different waves for a brief moment in time before returning to the deep. By looking directly into the nature of the aggregates, we move from the illusion of being a fixed entity to the reality of being a dynamic process of unfolding life that is interconnected with everything else. The modern mind often struggles with the idea of no self because it sounds like a loss of agency or a descent into meaninglessness. We are conditioned to believe that our individuality is our greatest asset and that without a central self, we would simply drift through life without purpose or direction. Evolutionary psychology explains that the brain is not a unified machine, but a collection of modules competing for control. One module wants to eat sugar for survival, another wants to save money for the future, and another wants to seek social status to attract a mate. The self is merely the voice that steps in after the fact to weave a coherent story out of these conflicting impulses. It is a public relations officer that tries to convince the world and itself that it is in charge of the entire operation. This critique reveals that our sense of self is often a form of self-deception that prevents us from seeing the true complexity of our nature. We cling to this deception because the alternative feels like a kind of death, a void where our memories and dreams used to be. However, the Buddha suggests that this death is actually a rebirth into a larger reality. The danger lies in falling into nihilism, the belief that because there is no permanent self, nothing matters and life has no meaning. This is a misunderstanding of the teaching. Anatta is not about the absence of life, but about the absence of a barrier between you and life. When we critique the ego, we are not trying to destroy the mind or the personality, but rather to see through the transparent walls we have built around ourselves. We often use spiritual concepts to reinforce our identity, creating a new and more sophisticated version of the ego that is proud of its own humility or its deep understanding of philosophy. This is the ultimate trap of the mind. We must be sharp enough to recognize when we are using the teaching of no self to avoid responsibility or to bypass the difficult emotions of being human. True wisdom requires us to stand in the middle of our lives, fully engaged and fully present, while knowing that the one who is experiencing it all is as fleeting as a dream. This realization does not make life less significant. It makes every moment infinitely more precious because it can never be repeated or held on to. We stop trying to own our experiences and start simply living them with a sense of wonder and resilience to the old habits of grasping and fear. By deconstructing the ego, we find that the very thing we thought was protecting us was actually the source of our isolation and pain. The critique of the self is the beginning of an authentic relationship with the world as it is, rather than as we wish it to be to suit our personal narratives. It is a call to wake up from the daydream of the me and to step into the sunlight of the here and now. If we can look at our own vanity and our own fears with a sense of humor and honesty, we begin to see that the self is not a solid mountain but a flickering candle flame in the wind. There is no need to protect a flame that is already part of the light of the world. This shift in perspective is the most difficult work we will ever do because it goes against every biological instinct we possess. But it is also the only work that leads to a peace that cannot be broken by the changes of time and fortune. Applying the wisdom of Anatta to our daily lives is where the true training of inner strength begins. When we stop being the center of our own drama, we gain a level of resilience that is impossible to achieve through willpower alone. In our work, we can focus on the task at hand with total clarity because we are no longer worried about how the outcome will reflect on our reputation or our standing in the eyes of others. We become more creative and more efficient because the energy that was once wasted on ego defense is now available for genuine action and problem solving. In our relationships, the teaching of no self allows us to love others without the heavy baggage of expectation and control. Most of our conflicts with those we love arise because our egos feel threatened or neglected. We want the other person to validate our sense of self and to conform to the image we have created for them. When we realize there is no solid self to be validated, we can see the other person for who they truly are, a fellow traveler in the flow of existence. This creates a space for a deep and unconditional compassion that does not ask for anything in return. We can listen without judging and give without keeping score, because there is no bookkeeper in the mind trying to maintain a balance of power. This applied awareness also changes how we face the inevitable suffering of life, such as illness, loss, and the aging process. If we believe we are our bodies or our memories, then the decline of these things feels like the destruction of our very being. But if we see these as changing aggregates, we can witness the decay with a calm and unshakable mind. Pain may still be present, but the suffering that comes from resisting that pain and saying, "Why is this happening to me?" is greatly diminished. We find a source of peace that is not dependent on external circumstances or the health of the physical form. This is the ultimate resilience, a mind that is like the sky, allowing any weather to pass through it without being changed or damaged by the clouds. We move through the world with a sense of lightheartedness and joy, knowing that the heavy armor of the self was never necessary to begin with. The practice of mindfulness becomes a way of constantly returning to this truth in every breath and every step. We become more attuned to the needs of the world around us because our vision is no longer clouded by the fog of self-interest. This is the true meaning of compassion, not as a moral duty, but as a natural expression of our interconnected reality. When the self is seen as an illusion, the boundary between my happiness and your happiness disappears, and we find ourselves acting for the benefit of all beings with a sense of ease and natural grace. We are no longer trying to get something from the world to fill an empty hole inside us, because we realize the hole itself is an illusion and we are already whole in our connection to the totality of life. This is the freedom that the Buddha promised, a freedom that does not require us to go anywhere or change anything except our own understanding of who we are. The teaching of the Buddha on the nature of self is not a philosophy to be studied from a distance, but a reality to be lived from the inside out. It is a radical invitation to drop the heavy luggage we have been carrying for a lifetime and to walk freely into the unknown. As you go about your day, notice the moments when the ego tries to take command, and simply watch it with a kind and curious eye. You do not need to fight it or change it. You only need to see it for what it is, a passing shadow in the light of awareness. In that seeing, there is a profound silence and a deep rest that the world can never take away from you. This is the end of the search and the beginning of a life lived in truth. Be still, and know that you are the space in which the universe unfolds.